Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Zaidi. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'll be providing you a brief overview of methods of disposing of underapplied or overapplied overhead. Okay, so basically there are three methods that we use to dispose of underapplied or overapplied overhead. And there is no order of these methods. So one of the methods is adjusted allocation rate approach. The other one is proration approach. And the third one is write-off to cost of goods sold approach. So we start with the adjusted allocation rate approach. In the adjusted allocation rate approach, what we do is at the end of the period, when we have the actual information available, we calculate the actual overhead rate using that information. And we use that instead of the predetermined overhead rate that we have calculated at the beginning of the period. And we use the actual rate to restate all the overhead entries in general ledger and subsidiary ledger, right? So if you remember that when we have manufacturing overhead account, we have actual on the left side and applied on the right side. And at the beginning of the period, we calculate predetermined overhead rate. Now, and then we use that predetermined overhead rate to apply overhead by multiplying predetermined overhead rate to the actual activity or actual cost driver or actual resource base. So this provides you applied overhead. However, in adjusted allocation rate approach, at the end of the period, when we have actual information available, we use that actual information to calculate actual rate. And then whatever the difference is between the applied overhead and the actual overhead, based on the rate we calculated, we dispose of those amounts by allocating them to work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account based on the overhead applied balance in each of these accounts. So this is adjusted allocation rate approach. Now, the second approach is the proration approach. And within the proration approach, we have two approaches, or there are two ways to use the proration approach. One is proration based on overhead balances in work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account. The other one is proration based on work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account balances. All right, so there is a slight difference. One is based on overhead balances in work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account. The other one is not based on overhead balances. The other one is based on just the balance within the work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account. Okay, so let's discuss proration based on overhead balances in work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account. So what we do here is whether we have applied over applied overhead, or we have under applied overhead at the end of the period, when we use proration based on overhead balances in work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account, we dispose of by spreading the amounts. Which amount? The over applied amount or under applied amount among work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account based on the total amount of overhead allocated during the period in the ending balances of work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account. So what we're doing is we are calculating the overhead balances in each of these three accounts: work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account, and we calculate a percentage using that amount, and then based on that we allocate and dispose of our over applied or under applied overhead to work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account. Okay. The other one is proration based on work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account balances. So in this case, when we have over applied or under applied overhead, we dispose of by spreading the under applied or over applied amounts among work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold accounts based on the ending balances during the period in work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold account. All right. In the previous one, proration based on overhead balances, we use the overhead balance in each of these three accounts: work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold. Whereas in this one, proration based on work in process, we are using the balance of work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold to allocate or spread the overhead under applied or over applied among these accounts. All right, so that's a slight difference. Okay. The third one, and the easiest one, is the write-off to cost of goods sold approach. Write-off to cost of goods sold approach we usually use when the overhead amount is not material, or over-applied or under-applied overhead amount is not material, because it's the simplest approach to follow. So what it does is this: whatever you have over-applied or under-applied overhead, you just dispose of under or over-applied overhead to cost of goods sold. All right, just close it to cost of goods sold. Do the journal entry and close it. Now, how you close it, how you perform adjusted allocation rate approach, how you perform two of the proration approaches, or how do you close over-applied or under-applied overhead to write off to cost of goods sold approach. We are going to discuss this in another video, but these are the three methods that we use. Okay, the next question arises: which approach is better? So as you can see here, the adjusted allocation rate approach is better than the other two approaches. And the reason is that the adjusted allocation rate uses the actual overhead rates, right? What can be better than that? At the end of the period, you have the actual rates available. You use them to calculate the overhead amount. So this provides more accurate picture, right? More accurate amount, and this is the actual. Okay, and that completes our brief overview of methods of disposing of under or over-applied overhead. Thank you for watching my video. If you like my videos, or if you like to see live updates, please subscribe my channel.